IVM.
I want to thank Intel for supporting our show. Do you remember last year when we spoke about how the Intel vPro platform is built for business? Well, I'm glad to say we've kicked it up a notch. That's right, Intel is back with a new and improved version of the platform. The new Intel vPro platform lets you do more of what you want and less of what you don't. So it's better for you and for your IT teams, who really are the backbone of keeping your work-from-home experience easy and enjoyable. I can safely say that the new vPro platform gives you more enterprise efficiency with less constraints. Visit intel.in/morewithvpro, that's VPRO, to discover how you can get more done with less waiting. If you're listening on the IVM Podcast Android app, click the link that's visible to you now.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I am Sunila, and today I have with me Suyash and Aditya. And we are going to be talking about South China Sea. Since many years, China has been asserting its dominance in South China Sea, and in past few months, it has been trying to project force through military drills by entering the exclusive economic zones of other ASEAN states and doubling down on its territorial claims. All of this has coincided with the standoff on its western borders, along with the line of actual control with India. As expected, there has been an increased U.S. involvement because of its Western interests, and there has been pushback by the regional actors as well. So, Suyash and Aditya, can you please provide us some background on the events that have taken place since December 2019, which have contributed to the escalation of geopolitical tensions in South China Sea?
So, as you have rightly pointed out, Sunila, that things started heating up in the South China Sea since December 2019. So in South China Sea, China had a standoff or multiple standoffs with various countries, starting with Indonesia. The first standoff that China had in December 2019 was with Indonesia near the Natuna Islands. This was followed by the Taiwanese elections, where China had a standoff, or China became more assertive in case of Taiwan. This was followed by different countries, Philippines being the usual suspect, Vietnam, Malaysia, across the first 3-4 months in the South China Sea. There are certain things which China did which were, if not rare, but after a very long period of time. For example, in April and May, they set up 2 new administrative districts to govern the South China Sea military islands. This was followed by renaming of the islands in the South China Sea. So these are some of the postures asserting their own sovereignty over the region. So these were some of the things that China did in the first half of the year in South China Sea. Lately, this has been followed by steps like cultivating few plants, especially they call it baby cabbage, over these rocks and reefs. I'll tell you the reason why they are doing that. If you go back to 2016, the judgment between Philippines and China in PCA, if I'm correct, Permanent Court of Arbitration, which was ruled convincingly in favor of the Philippines. One of the statements particularly highlighted that China cannot claim the territory around rocks, reefs, and shoals because there are no permanent settlements on them. So, by growing vegetation on these barren islands or rocks or reefs, they are trying to develop, this is what I think, they're trying to develop permanent vegetations on these areas, which would allow them to settle on South China Sea, which will enable their claim in the territorial waters. So these are notable things that China did in the past few months in the South China Sea.
So, as per my understanding, there have been questions raised about the lawfulness of the activities that China has been carrying out in the South China Sea area. In July 2020, US's State Secretary Michael Pompeo made a statement which marked a shift in the US's position on the South China Sea matter. And there was some reaction to that by ASEAN countries as well. So, can you tell us more about what the secretaries of state pointed out in his statement? What were the important things to be noted from his statement and the US's change in position?
Okay, before I highlight to US's change in position, one thing I forgot. US also became very active, or US also became hyperactive in the South China Sea since March. The activities were very parallel. The Chinese activity in the South China Sea were parallel to the rollout of pandemic, or to the pandemic across the world which happened. So US became very active since March, and since April there have been multiple FONOPS operation carried out by US Navy in the South China Sea, which involved two strike groups at one particular period of time. This was later joined by Australia, Japan. Also, India's ship was there, but they didn't do a joint FONOPS. So these were some of the things that multiple countries did in the South China Sea. Militarily, US got active in April, but diplomatic activism or diplomatic assertion started with a change of statement which came out recently, as you have already highlighted. US's Secretary of State Michael Pompeo, in his press conference, said that there are 5 important points that he made when there was a quote-unquote change of US's approach. First important point was Beijing has no basis to claim 9-dash line. He also emphasized on the fact that the 2016 decision that PCA gave in case of PRC and the Philippines was final decision and enforceable in nature. He also said that US's position is very similar to that of the PCA ruling. More importantly, when the change of approach means that they would now focus on territorial part of the maritime dispute part. US has taken a position on the maritime dispute part of the South China Sea, where according to the 2006 tribunal ruling, Beijing cannot claim territorial waters, EEZ, based on shoals and stones, our islands, barren islands. But more importantly, they have not taken a stand on historic dispute in the region. So I'll explain it. For example, paracels. US is saying that China cannot claim EEZ or China cannot claim 12 nautical miles based on the territorial dispute of the Paracel Island, but they are not specifically saying anything on the historic rights which China invokes to claim the Paracel Islands. This is an important distinction that we have to draw when we look at the nature of change of approach that US is putting forward through this.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me that while the US does say that China does not have a legal basis for the so-called 9-dash line, they are not taking sides explicitly in these disputes. 2 obvious reasons for this. One is that the countries of the South China Sea themselves have disputes between themselves about what belongs to whom exactly. And second, the US does not want to take a stand on these disputes because it would basically give those countries in the region less room to maneuver, and it might also draw the US into such territorial disputes. Similarly, for example, the US has not taken sides in the territorial dispute between India and China. So in that sense, there is a pattern. While they are implicitly backing some of these countries, they are not explicitly taking sides in the specifics of the territorial disputes themselves.
But Aditya, there is a problem over here because most of the Chinese claims are not based on the territorial dispute or territorial nature of the dispute, but the Chinese claims are based on historical nature of dispute. So
but see, that's So the thing is, so that's why the Americans said there is no basis for 9-dash line. So anything that hinders freedom of navigation through these waters, America will oppose. On the other hand, if there is a dispute about the Paracel Islands specifically, America may not take sides.
Correct, absolutely. Yeah, so this is a more clear picture that is coming out, if we can say so, from US foreign policy, is it?
That's interesting to know. One of the interesting things you mentioned, Aditya, is that ASEAN countries themselves have overlapping claims over the South China Sea, right? So post US's change in position on the South China Sea matter, obviously there was some reaction by the countries in ASEAN region. Now, as per my understanding, many of the ASEAN countries, they are almost completely economically dependent on China, and also their military strength is not as great as China's. So they are being very cautious. So some of the ASEAN countries are being very cautious, while other half of the countries, they have taken a firm stance. So there has been a mixed reaction from ASEAN as a region. What do you guys have to say about that?
Okay. So ASEAN, in case of ASEAN regional grouping, that's the problem that they have been having in since 1978 on every issue that they are dealing with. Because there is the ASEAN way is very different from how other regional organization works. So ASEAN is not able to come up with a proper solution for proper, even forget solution, even a press release on any of the South China Sea issue, because there are multiple opinion bending towards both the powers, both the poles. So ASEAN, some of the ASEAN countries appreciated the US position on freedom of navigation, but no ASEAN country particularly pointed out China or pointed. So there were a lot of FONOPS operation being carried out, which with extra regional players into this region. So no ASEAN country participated in this FONOPS operation. There was a joint communique which didn't mention US or China. Particularly, they were saying that okay, freedom of navigation is important. It is important to maintain free South China Sea region, but all the important communiques failed to mention both the countries or the change of the position by both the countries. None of the ASEAN countries participated in any operation. None of the ASEAN countries directly commented on Chinese stand or Chinese reaction to US foreign change of US approach. Only I think Philippines mentioned China's name when they said that we are not a powerful country, and let us wait and watch and let the two superpowers fight between themselves, and this will eventually go off. We are not in a position right now to take a stand on any of the two powers, claims made by any of the two powers. So as usual, ASEAN has been always criticized as a talking shop, and that is what it did. It didn't take a stand on any of the claims made by both the countries, and it basically even for example the recent ASEAN summit that happened, the communique took 2 days to come out because there was no agreement between all the 10 countries on whether to put China's name into it or not. So this is the reality of ASEAN, that they are not able to come on the same page even in terms of a declaration. Forget anything else.
The only other country that may have mentioned China in reaction would have been Malaysia, which basically said that China did not have have the right to claim establishment of its continental shelf in specific waters. So yeah, fairly weak and watered down statements from ASEAN countries.
But Aditya, that is a different part. So for example, Indonesia, when Natuna was happening, Indonesia was also very assertive in what it was saying. But that is in their bilateral dispute. As a regional grouping, they were not ready to take a stand.
Absolutely, yeah. As a regional grouping, they're not going to be able to do it.
So, for example, when Natuna happened, Indonesia also performed military drills within their region and the South China Sea. But as a regional, larger point here is that as a regional grouping, they were not ready to take any stand.
As per my understanding, ASEAN's founding principles were respect for national sovereignty and non-intervention in domestic politics and peaceful resolution of disputes. But there, as Suyash rightly said, I guess the ASEAN countries are criticized for these very principles because under the name of these principles, they are not ready to take a stand as a regional entity. Isn't that right, Suyash?
Yeah, that's right. As in, ASEAN has been largely criticized for so many years for not taking stand on any issues, despite issues that are directly affecting them, especially in the geopolitical realm. So ASEAN way, as people have criticized, is no way. It's a very academic critique where a lot of papers were claiming ASEAN way is no way because the consensus, because it is principally worked on the factor, it is principally worked on consensus. And consensus means where no one says no. And if there is a single no, then the whole process has been delayed. Unlike other organizations or treaties such as NATO, where consensus is not so important. So yeah, because there is consensus, they have not been able to take a very firm position on most of the issues.
Right. So after US stated its changing position on the South China Sea matter, there was a lot of back and forth among China, US, and the ASEAN countries through diplomatic as well as military channels. So, can you tell us in detail about what China's reaction was?
Obviously, China's reaction was on two fronts. One was the diplomatic front, one was the military front. On diplomatic front, they held a rally of press conferences where they said that this is the US government's opinion. The US is not a regional stakeholder, it's an extra regional stakeholder. Their opinion doesn't matter. US themselves refuses to ratify UNCLOS. So they were the one who had withdrawn from all international treaties, most of the international treaties. So their voice is not credible and it doesn't matter. This was on the diplomatic front. So China's military exercises got a reaction from US's military exercises, where two US carrier strike groups along with Australia and Japan were doing FONOPs before going to RIMPAC in the South China Sea. This got a reaction from Chinese exercises, where China also moved its aircraft carrier. China moved its amphibious vehicles. There were a lot of drills performed in the South China Sea. One interesting military development was again this was you can call it as deterrence, or you can call it as signaling, where both US and China conducted missile tests. China conducted missile tests using their DF-26, which is also called as carrier killer, because at the same time, US's two aircraft strike groups were performing FONOPS operation in the South China Sea. So there was a lot of rhetoric coming out based on China's missile tests. There were US's missile tests from Guam. So the South China Sea has been a military hotspot for the past 5-6 months. There are a lot of activities had taken place, starting with China and followed by US, and there was to and fro throughout past 3-4 months. In case of the regional change of regional approach, or change of approach in some Southeast Asian countries, yes. For example, the Philippines, because a lot of things happened since the start of the year. And there were two differing opinions in case of Philippines. Their defense secretary and their president were not talking in the same voice. So defense secretary was more hawkish in case of China. We know about Duterte. We don't need to talk anything about Duterte and his approach since 2016. So surprisingly, last 15 days of September is when UNGA happens, United Nations General Assembly. After a long time, and perhaps for the first time, Philippines president became more aggressive in case of China and its claims in South China Sea. It also said that the president also said that if needed, they might call the United States, invoke their mutual defense agreement if China's assertion or China's aggression continue. So these were some startling statements made by the Philippines president, which got a lot of praises in the United Nations General Assembly. Vietnam, again, yes, one of the major country which is harassed by Chinese militia in the South China Sea. So Vietnam also made some specific statements targeting Chinese militia. I have not read their UNGA statement yet, but in the past 7-8 months, a lot of militia's presence was there in Vietnam's EZ, which also got Vietnam's reaction. Indonesia has been quite assertive about what it is saying regarding South China Sea. And Malaysia, because they were involved in a recent standoff, which included Petronas, the company Petronas, that's why Malaysia is also becoming slowly asserting itself or slowly taking stands in case of South China Sea. So if you see a larger picture, Chinese activities in the South China Sea lately has resulted into ASEAN, the Southeast Asian countries, voicing up their opinions in the region. So, and slowly pushing China back and taking or siding with the United States. It is just a start. We don't know where this will go ahead, but there are patterns of things going in United States favor because of Chinese aggression in the South China Sea. This is what I could read of the things that are happening in the South China Sea. These are individual instances of different countries doing different things. Again, they are not on the same page in case of dispute, in case of uh, putting a statement out through ASEAN, because there are a lot of countries. There is Myanmar, there is Cambodia involved in ASEAN, and again, as there is consensus, this will never happen. But some individual countries which are at the forefront of this, forefront of Chinese aggression in the South China Sea, namely Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Singapore, are starting to hit back slowly and steadily. Philippines, I don't know how long it will go, but yes, the UNGA statement was something to be taken notice of.
It's interesting to see that countries who were cautious before are now taking a firm stand for themselves on the South China Sea matter. Moving on to the final question, Suyash and Aditya, what do you think should be the key takeaways for India from the South China Sea matter, and how do you think it would figure out in the LAC standoff that has been going on for a while?
So it's an interesting question, Sunila. Nitin and I are writing a paper on this very topic, and our basic argument I'll give you some parts of that paper. Our basic argument in that paper is that we should take it's not to continue the standoff on our northern borders is not feasible for India, and we should take that into our maritime domain. More importantly, into larger Indo-Pacific theater, which would not only imply the Indian Ocean but the South China Sea as well. Our basic recommendations in the forthcoming paper are one, which is often very much said that India should develop its naval capabilities. Navy is one of the most underfunded services in India's history. We recommend that, or we argue that India should also focus on its Navy and develop capabilities to counterbalance China in the Indian Ocean region. And furthermore, in the South China Sea, though South China Sea, looking at India's current defense expenditure, South China Sea is distant, far away. So India should develop naval capabilities. For developing naval capabilities, it should also alter its naval doctrine, which focuses on sea control and power projection to more specifically on sea denial because of the budget restraints, which would go on for some years in the future, considering we are in a pandemic. So this is the first important recommendation that we have made. The second important recommendation is to fill the gap. Because we are underfunded and because of the pandemic and defense budget, because of the pandemic going ahead, there would be budgetary restraints. That's why we recommend that the gap can be filled, the military gap can be filled by diplomatic activities, by counterbalancing China through diplomatic activities in the Indo-Pacific theater. Counterbalancing can not only be with the Quad countries, but also with extra-regional and regional powers. Extra-regional power, one being France, regional powers in South China Sea being Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia. So these are the countries that India should look to for counterbalancing China. Also, not only through mainstream forums or organizations, India could also use its own organizations, like for instance, IORA or IONS Symposium. So these are the institutions that India could also use, or even bilaterally. India could use bilateral relations with these countries to counterbalance China in the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. The third important recommendation that we make, that is the one which we have borrowed from Rear Admiral Shikhande's paper for the ORF, is regarding increasing of FONOPS operation in the South China Sea. Is India capable of doing individual FONOPS operation in the South China Sea at this moment? No. Can India do a joint FONOPS operation with US, Australia, and like-minded powers? Yes. So we recommend that, based on Real Admiral Srikhande's reading, that India should do joint FONOPS operation not only in Indian Ocean region but also in South China Sea. Why basing agreements and FONOPS are important? Basing agreement is important because if the nearest naval base to the South China Sea for India is the Andaman Tri-Service Command base, which from where it takes 4 days to reach the South China Sea. And often the Indian vessel, due to the lack of capability, lack of numbers of deploying more vessels in the South China Sea, would get isolated in the south in that region. And that's why naval basing with these countries, regional stakeholders, is very important. Also, FONOPS is important because of the assertion, or because of the message or posturing that we could do using FONOPS in that region. So these are some of the important recommendations that we have made in the forthcoming paper on South China Sea.
Yeah, Suyash has made some really excellent points, and there's not much I can add to this except to maybe give some suggestions about what collaboration with those regional powers might look like. For one, India can also provide some sort of limited diplomatic backing to countries in the South China Sea. For example, specifically to partners like Vietnam, that basically give them some degree of diplomatic backing, some degree of moral support. Besides that, on a more substantial basis, as Suyash said, we should have logistics and basic agreements with as many of these countries as possible, and we should also work with other countries in the Quad to help these countries develop specific capabilities. For example, to have ship-based defenses against cruise missiles, to have anti-ship cruise missiles of their own, and to develop more broadly their anti-submarine warfare capabilities. Finally, I think that we can develop fora in which not just Quad, but a sort of Quad plus grouping of countries can maybe discuss how the navies of the South China Sea or even the coast guards can deal with China's gray zone tactics, how intelligence about this can be shared, learnings can be pooled together and discussed. I think these sort of informal structures will broadly over several years constrain China's options and force it to be more cooperative with the countries in the South China Sea to the benefit of India.
Those were some riveting recommendations you both. So obviously everyone is looking forward to what will be India's next steps when it comes to China. It is really interesting that you mentioned that India should be exploring more of diplomatic ties with other countries in the region, which will help in creating a strong position for itself. Concluding, I would like to thank Aditya and Suyash for joining me in this interesting discussion, and I would like to thank the listeners for listening to All Things Policy. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Intel, for supporting us. So Jasleen Royal came on Storytellers and Storytellers this week with Vineet. It was a really interesting conversation. Do definitely check that out. Hamsini Hariharan is back on the Pragati podcast after an extended absence. Hamsini was one of the original hosts along with Pravan, but she was unable to continue. But we're glad to have her back. She's talking about her experiences since she left. She's been studying in China. Definitely check that out. You'll enjoy that. Abhijit Ganguly was on Cyrus Says a couple of weeks ago, and he had such a great time, and we were so happy to have him on that we asked him to join us for Cocked and Bull, and he was on this week. Do check that out. And lastly, I'd like to mention our Tamil show. We've been doing a show called Kadai Podcast Punyan Selvan, hosted by Kavita Jiva. She has been phenomenal. She's rewritten the stories in a way which really, they speak to a modern audience. But Punyan Selvan is over, and she has started a new story, though. The new story that she started is Sivakamiyan Sabatham. I'm sure I mangled that pronunciation, and I'm sure you'll love it if you're a Tamil speaker. Do definitely check it out. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Entertainment is like food for the brain. It's a window to culture and a great way to understand the world around us. The internet has changed what it means to be an entertainer, creating new storytellers with millions of fans. It has spawned a new breed, the story sellers, those behind the scenes creating the business for this ecosystem. They work with brands, platforms and channels who are keen to capitalize on an audience hungrier than ever for more stories. I'm Vineet Kanabar, and I have a ringside view to how stories are told and sold. On my show, I bring you creators, artists, executives, and marketers for a freewheeling conversation around the business of entertainment. Tune in to Storytellers and Storysellers for personal stories, analysis, and criticism every Thursdays as I talk to the brightest minds telling or selling great stories today.